there is a question most people never say out loud. Not to a therapist, not to a partner, not even to themselves in the quiet of a sleepless night. Why don't I have friends anymore? Not because something terrible happened, not because of a fight or a betrayal, just a slow, quiet disappearance. People who were once there simply aren't anymore. And what makes it stranger is that part of you doesn't miss them the way you thought you would. Carl Jung believed this experience could have a deeper meaning than most people realize. He argued that one of the hardest things a person can face is the complete acceptance of themselves. It means that as you begin to become who you truly are, the people around you often respond not with celebration, but with distance. The version of you they knew, the one who fit expectations, avoided conflict, and played the familiar role, is quietly disappearing. And not everyone can follow that transformation. Not everyone wants to. Jung called this the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming your authentic self instead of a reflection of what the world expects you to be. He believed very few people ever complete this journey, and for those who do, periods of profound social isolation often appear near its final psychological stage. This is not really a story about friendship. It's about what that slow, quiet disappearance is trying to reveal. Because Jung believed that moments like these are rarely about other people alone. They point towards something happening much deeper within us, something most people never stop long enough to notice, and even fewer have the courage to understand. So what if the real question was never, why don't I have friends anymore? What if the real question is, who am I becoming without them? Let's find out. Part 1. Why some friends leave. When you become yourself, there is a kind of loss that few people know how to explain. It is not the pain of betrayal, and it is not the grief of losing someone overnight. It happens more quietly than that. A conversation becomes shorter. A message goes unanswered for longer than usual. Invitations arrive less often, then stop arriving at all. One day, you look around and realize that people who once felt central to your life have slowly moved to the edges of it. Nothing dramatic happened. No final argument. No clear goodbye. You simply changed, and something in the relationship could no longer follow you. Most people, when this happens, immediately turn against themselves. They ask, "What did I do wrong?" They replay old conversations, searching for the sentence that changed everything. They wonder if they became too quiet, too distant, too serious, or too difficult to be around. But Jung would point in a different direction. He might say that the real question is not what you did wrong. The real question is what you stopped pretending to be. To understand that, we have to understand one of his most important ideas, the persona. The persona is the social mask we learn to wear in order to function in the world. It helps us fit in, avoid rejection, earn approval, and become recognizable to others. The persona is not necessarily false. It is not a lie in the simple sense. In many ways, it is necessary. We all need some version of it to live among other people. The problem begins when we forget that the mask is only a mask. Over time, the role becomes so familiar that it starts to feel like our identity. We become the funny one, the reliable one, the peacemaker, the listener, the one who keeps the group together. People respond to that role, and because they respond, we keep performing it. Slowly, without noticing, we begin to trade authenticity for belonging. The mask no longer feels like something we wear. It begins to feel like our face. But at a certain point, something inside a person may begin to resist. It rarely happens all at once. It starts as a quiet discomfort with conversations that once felt easy. Social gatherings begin to feel less like connection and more like performance. You may still know how to play the old role, but it costs more energy than it used to. You laugh at the right moments, answer in the familiar way, keep the room comfortable, and still feel strangely absent from your own life. Jung saw this as the beginning of a deeper psychological movement, the slow separation between the authentic self and the persona. It is not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It is the self beginning to ask for a more honest life. And when that begins, some relationships naturally start to change. Not because you have become worse, colder, or less worthy of love, but because some people were connected to the role you played rather than the person underneath it. Imagine someone who spent years being the emotional center of every group, organizing dinners, remembering birthdays, softening conflicts, making everyone laugh, keeping everything light. People loved being around them because they made life easier. Then life forces them to stop. Maybe through illness, exhaustion, grief, or simple interchange, they can no longer perform that version of themselves. They become quieter. They need more space. They stop carrying the emotional weight of the room. When they return, they discover something painful. The group still exists, but it has quietly reorganized without them. The invitations are fewer. The conversations are polite but shallow. The closeness they once trusted no longer feels real. What hurts most is not only that people drifted away, it is the realization that much of the bond had depended on a version of themselves they no longer wished to be. Jung would not necessarily call this a failure of friendship. He would call it the natural consequence of relationships built through personas rather than authentic selves. When the mask begins to dissolve, the connections built around that mask often dissolve with it. At first, this feels like rejection, but perhaps it is also space. The first real space in which you no longer have to negotiate your identity just to belong. When the people who loved the performance begin to leave, what remains is not simply emptiness. It is the beginning of a harder question. Who are you when you no longer perform for the room? Part 2. Why silence feels so uncomfortable. When was the last time you were completely alone? Not scrolling through your phone, not listening to music or a podcast, not working, watching something, or filling the room with background noise. Just you, sitting quietly with nothing between yourself and your own thoughts. And if that moment did happen, how long did it last before you instinctively reached for a distraction? For most people, the answer is only a few seconds. The hand reaches for the phone almost automatically. The television turns on without a real reason. It happens so quickly that we rarely stop to ask why silence has become something we seem unable to tolerate. Carl Jung believed this reaction was far more revealing than it first appears. He once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." At first glance, this sounds like a statement about relationships. It is not. It is a statement about the inner world. Jung was describing the experience of carrying emotions, desires, fears, and questions that have never found words. When that happens, being surrounded by people cannot truly remove loneliness. It only postpones it. Conversation, entertainment, and constant activity become a layer of noise covering something that continues to wait underneath. The loneliness was never outside of you. It simply became easier not to notice while life remained busy. This is why losing your social life can feel so overwhelming, even if you were never deeply satisfied by it. When the noise disappears, silence does not immediately feel peaceful. Instead, it exposes everything the noise had been hiding. Old memories return without warning. Unfinished grief quietly asks for attention. Questions about your career, your relationships, or the direction of your life suddenly become impossible to ignore. Even desires you buried years ago begin to surface again. Blaise Pascal observed something remarkably similar centuries before Jung, when he argued that many of humanity's problems come from our inability to sit quietly alone in a room. Silence does not create these problems. It reveals the ones that were already living beneath distraction. This is the part of solitude that people rarely talk about. We often hear that solitude brings creativity, wisdom, and self-discovery. All of that is true, but only after you pass through something much less appealing. The first stage is discomfort, the restless urge to check your phone, the impulse to text someone you do not even miss, the endless cycle of worries, regrets, and imaginary conversations that suddenly fills your mind. Many people experience this and immediately conclude that solitude simply is not for them. They tell themselves they are naturally social. Sometimes that is true, but often the discomfort has little to do with personality. It comes from standing too close to truths that have been waiting for years to be acknowledged. Jung believed that if you remain in that silence instead of escaping it, something unexpected begins to happen. Silence starts speaking, not with words, but through feelings, memories, recurring dreams, and subtle realizations. You begin to notice that parts of your life no longer fit the person you are becoming. Jung described this stage as the beginning of the night sea journey, a symbolic descent into the unconscious where the ego gradually loses its familiar defenses. It is not comfortable, and it was never meant to be. You cannot think your way through it, optimize it, or schedule it between meetings. You can only remain present long enough for the unconscious to reveal what your distractions have been protecting you from. Perhaps this is why silence feels so frightening. It is not because it is empty, but because it is full of unanswered questions, forgotten emotions, and parts of yourself that have patiently waited for your attention. The people who fear silence the most are not always the least self-aware. Sometimes they are the ones who already sense what silence is preparing to reveal. The real question then is not whether you are ready to hear what your inner world has to say. It is whether you are finally willing to stop drowning it out. Part 3. The shadow. That solitude reveals people often imagine solitude as peaceful. They picture quiet mornings, journals, slow coffee, and the comforting feeling of finally being at ease with themselves. That version of solitude exists, but it is rarely the one we meet first. Before peace comes something much less inviting. Restlessness, old anger that seems to have no obvious cause, grief that appears without warning, a strange heaviness that settles over ordinary evenings. Many people assume these feelings mean solitude is harming them. Jung believed the opposite. He believed solitude was revealing what had been hidden all along. Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is one of his most misunderstood ideas. He was not encouraging people to become consumed by pain or negativity. He was pointing toward a simple psychological truth. What surfaces in solitude was already living inside you. It does not appear because you are alone. It appears because perhaps for the first time in years, there is enough quiet for you to notice it. Jung called this hidden territory the shadow. The shadow is not an evil version of yourself. It is simply the collection of everything you learned to suppress, the emotions that felt unacceptable, the ambitions that did not fit the role you were expected to play, the fears you hid beneath competence, humor, or constant productivity. Every social interaction requires a certain amount of self-control. We naturally show the parts of ourselves that help us belong while keeping other parts out of sight. Those hidden parts do not disappear. They simply move into the unconscious, waiting for an opportunity to be acknowledged. This is why periods of deep solitude can feel unexpectedly intense. When the social performance slows down, the unconscious begins releasing what has been stored for years. Imagine a river blocked by a dam. Behind it, branches, leaves, and debris continue to accumulate until the water can barely move. When the dam finally opens, the first thing that emerges is not clear water. It is everything that had been trapped behind it. The same is true of the human mind. The first stage of psychological healing often looks messy, because what has been buried must move before it can settle. Many people misinterpret this stage. They believe the discomfort means they are becoming emotionally unstable, when in reality they are becoming more honest with themselves. Jung argued that the shadow does not disappear when ignored. It quietly shapes our lives from behind the scenes. It appears in repeated relationship patterns, irrational irritation, unexplained anxiety, or the persistent feeling that something is missing despite external success. Bringing the shadow into awareness does not strengthen it. It weakens its unconscious control. What remains hidden controls us. What becomes conscious can finally be understood. But solitude alone is not enough. A person can spend years isolated while continuing to avoid themselves through endless distraction, fantasy, or resentment. Real solitude is not simply the absence of people. It is the willingness to remain present with whatever rises from within, without immediately pushing it away. That is where the path begins to divide. Some people escape the discomfort and return to the familiar mask. Others stay long enough to discover that the darkness they feared was never their enemy. It was the doorway to becoming whole. Part 4: Solitude that heals and solitude that hides. There is a question that Jung would ask if he were sitting across from you right now. Not a complicated question, not a clinical one, just this. When you are alone, are you moving toward yourself or away from something else? The distinction sounds subtle, but the answer changes everything about what your solitude is actually doing to you. Two people can live in almost identical circumstances. Both have few friends. Both spend long stretches of time alone. Both have pulled back from social obligations that once filled their calendars. From the outside, their lives look remarkably similar. But inside, something entirely different is happening. The first person is alone because something in them is growing, and the old containers no longer fit. The relationships that fell away were built on a version of themselves that no longer feels true. The solitude, uncomfortable as it sometimes is, carries a quality of aliveness. There are questions surfacing that feel important even when they are difficult. There is movement, even when that movement is slow. The second person is alone because the world started to feel dangerous, because people hurt them, or disappointed them, or failed to see them in the ways they needed to be seen. The solitude is not a growing space. It is a defended one, a wall with very good philosophical decoration. The The quiet in their life does not have the quality of depth. It has the quality of protection. Jung drew a clear line between these two experiences. He called one genuine solitude, the kind that serves the process of becoming more fully oneself. He called the other isolation. And he was precise about why isolation, despite looking like strength, is actually a form of stagnation. Isolation keeps the shadow exactly where it is, because the shadow does not need other people to surface. It needs honesty. And isolation, when it is driven by self-protection, is one of the most sophisticated forms of dishonesty available to a human being. You can surround the whole thing with books about individuation and quotes about inner peace and a genuine belief that you have chosen this consciously. But if the choice was made out of fear rather than readiness, the unconscious knows the difference even when the conscious mind does not. The honest question, and this is not comfortable to sit with, is not whether you are alone. It is why. Are you alone because something in you is clarifying, and the people who were part of an older version of your life simply no longer fit what is forming? Or are you alone because staying alone means nobody can reach the parts of you that are still raw and unresolved? Both can feel identical from the inside, especially in the early stages. Both can come with a sense of relief at not having to perform. Both can generate a real appreciation for quiet. The difference only becomes visible when you look at what the solitude is producing over time. Genuine solitude, even when it is uncomfortable, has a quality of forward movement. Something is processing, clarifying, becoming. The questions it raises are ones you are actually willing to sit with, even when they are hard. Isolation that is dressed up as solitude tends to produce a different quality over time. A growing sense of superiority that never quite settles into actual peace. A sharpening of the reasons why other people are the problem. A philosophy of self-sufficiency that requires constant maintenance, because underneath it, the hunger for real connection has not actually disappeared. It has just been reclassified as weakness. Jung did not say this to be harsh. He said it because he believed that the capacity to be genuinely alone, to use solitude as a space for real inner work rather than sophisticated avoidance, is one of the rarest and most demanding things a human being can develop. And the only way to develop it is to be honest about which one you are actually doing. Not to a therapist, not to anyone else. Just to yourself, in the silence, where the answer is already there, waiting for you to stop arguing with it. Part 5. The 6 years that changed. Carl Jung. In 1912, Carl Jung appeared to have everything. He was one of Europe's most respected psychologists. His practice was flourishing, and Sigmund Freud had publicly named him the future of psychoanalysis. Then, almost overnight, everything changed. Jung's break with Freud was more than a professional disagreement. It was the collapse of an entire intellectual world. He lost not only his mentor, but also the community that had formed around him. Colleagues sided with Freud, invitations disappeared, and the man who had stood at the center of modern psychology suddenly found himself standing completely alone. What followed is the part of Jung's life most people rarely talk about. He did not immediately rebuild his career or surround himself with new allies. Instead, he withdrew to his home in Küsnacht, where he entered nearly 6 years of profound psychological uncertainty. During that time, he built stone towers by the lake, filled journals with dreams and symbolic visions, and began an extraordinary dialogue with his own unconscious. Rather than escaping these experiences, he chose to observe them with remarkable honesty. Later, Jung admitted that this period was deeply unsettling. He wrote that he felt crushed by an inner pressure he could neither explain nor escape. At times, the boundary between his inner world and ordinary reality became frighteningly thin. This was not a man peacefully enjoying solitude. It was a man struggling to remain present while his old identity was falling apart. Yet almost everything we associate with Jung today was born during those years. His understanding of the shadow, his theory of individuation, the foundations of analytical psychology. Even much of what later became the Red Book emerged from this difficult period of isolation. None of Jung's greatest ideas were born while he was admired and surrounded by colleagues. They were born while he was alone. This matters because it reveals what the final stage in this video's title actually looks like from the inside. It does not feel like becoming extraordinary. It does not feel like reaching some higher level of consciousness. It feels uncertain. Familiar relationships begin to disappear. Old identities lose their meaning, and the future offers very little reassurance. From the outside, it can even look like failure. Jung did not choose those 6 years. What he chose was not to escape them. He refused to return to an old identity simply because it felt safer than facing the unknown. He remained with the uncertainty long enough for something deeper to emerge. That quiet decision changed not only his own life, but also the way millions of people would later understand the human mind. If your own world has grown quieter, if friendships have faded, and if you find yourself suspended between the person you were and the person you are becoming, remember this: you are not standing behind Jung. You are standing where he once stood, before any of it made sense. Perhaps nothing is wrong with this season of your life. Perhaps this is where it begins. Part 6. Not no one, just the right ones. Here is something the video you watched before this one probably did not tell you. Jung was not alone, not ultimately, not permanently. After the 6 years, after the stone towers and the painted images and the journal conversations with figures from his own unconscious. After the ground finally steadied and the language for what he had been through began to form, Jung returned to connection, not to the large, structured community of professional colleagues he had lost when he separated from Freud, but to something far less numerous and far more real. He had Tony Wolff, who understood the interior dimensions of his work in ways that few people in his life were able to. He had Emma Jung, his wife, who remained a genuine intellectual companion across decades of marriage. He had Agnella Jaffe, who worked with him closely in his final years and was the one who eventually helped him give shape to his memoirs. These were not casual acquaintances. They were not the kind of connections that form when two people happen to occupy the same social space at the same time. Jung had a word for this kind of connection: Seelenfreundschaft, soul friendship, and the way he described it makes clear that he considered it categorically different from ordinary social companionship. Soul friendship is not built on shared history or proximity or the comfort of having someone familiar to call. It is built on something much harder to manufacture and much harder to lose. It is the experience of being genuinely seen by another person, not the version of you that is easy to know, not the persona, the performance, the face you present to make things run smoothly, but the actual interior of you, including the parts that are still being formed, still uncertain, still in the process of becoming. Jung wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. That transformation is what distinguishes soul friendship from social connection. Ordinary connection leaves you largely as you were. Soul friendship changes the shape of something inside you, and you change the shape of something inside the other person, and neither of you can fully predict what will form from the contact. This kind of connection is rare, not because it requires extraordinary people. It requires people who have done enough interior work to actually show up as themselves rather than as the most acceptable version of themselves. And that interior work, as everything in this video has been pointing toward, is precisely what the period of solitude makes possible. The contraction of your social world is not the end of connection. It is the end of a particular kind of connection. The kind that was built on persona rather than on the actual person. The kind that required you to manage yourself carefully in order to maintain it. The kind that gave you the warm sensation of belonging without ever quite giving you the experience of being known. What comes after that contraction, for the people who stay in it rather than rushing to fill the space with new versions of the same thing, is the possibility of something that actually reaches you. Not many connections. Jung himself did not have many, but the ones he had were the kind that, as he put it, transformed both people through the contact. The final stage that this video's title names is not the stage where you no longer need people. It is the stage where you have become enough of yourself that the people who find you now find the actual you, not the performance, not the accommodation. The person who came through the silence and the shadow and the years of uncertain ground and is still standing. That person does not need to fill a room to feel full. But when the right one walks in, they will know. Part 7. The final stage is not the end. Jung never argued that rare people were born different. He believed rarity emerged through a process. Most people build a persona and spend their lives protecting it. Some eventually begin to question that mask. Fewer are willing to face the shadow hiding beneath it, and fewer still remain with uncertainty long enough to become who they truly are. From a Jungian perspective, that is what makes a personality genuinely rare. It is not a special temperament or an extraordinary gift. It is the willingness to continue becoming yourself when every familiar certainty begins to disappear. But there is one final misunderstanding that has to be addressed. A person hears everything about individuation, solitude, and the gradual loss of old relationships, and quietly turns it into a flattering story. They begin to believe that having no friends automatically makes them deeper than everyone else. Their loneliness becomes proof of their uniqueness. Their isolation becomes evidence that they have outgrown the people around them. Jung warned repeatedly against this kind of thinking. He called it ego inflation, the moment genuine psychological insight is quietly claimed by the very ego it was supposed to transform. The old mask disappears only to be replaced by a new one built around the identity of being more awakened, more conscious, or more special than others. That is not individuation. It is simply another disguise. So how do you know the difference? Jung suggested that real psychological growth is surprisingly quiet. It does not make you feel superior, and it does not create a need to convince anyone else that you have changed. Instead, it changes the way you relate to yourself. You stop measuring your worth through other people's attention. You no longer panic when your phone stays silent, or when an invitation never arrives. Not because you have stopped caring about people, but because your identity no longer depends on being constantly reflected back through them. The center of gravity gradually shifts inward. Approval becomes welcome. but no longer necessary. Solitude becomes a place you can enter without immediately trying to escape it. You also begin to notice a different relationship with time. The constant pressure to become someone else starts to fade. There is less urgency to prove yourself, less fear of missing out, and less anxiety about whether your life looks successful from the outside. You become more patient with your own growth because you understand that individuation is not a destination to reach, but a lifelong process of returning to yourself. Looking back, you no longer feel the need to blame the people who drifted away, nor do you blame yourself for becoming different. You simply recognize that some relationships belonged to an earlier chapter of your life. They were meaningful for who you were then, but they could not always grow alongside who you were becoming. Perhaps this is what the title of this video has really been pointing toward. Having no friends is not the final stage, because isolation itself is somehow enlightened. Nor is it proof that you have reached a higher level than everyone around you. It is simply a place where many people find themselves after the old persona begins to dissolve, and before new relationships have had time to form around the person they are genuinely becoming. Some people panic in that space and rush back to old identities. Others stay long enough for something more authentic to emerge. That willingness to remain with uncertainty rather than escaping it is what Jung believed very few people ever achieved. In the end, the rarest personality is not the one with the fewest friends. It is the one that no longer needs friendship to prove its worth, yet remains fully capable of loving, trusting, and connecting when those relationships are real. It has not rejected the world. It has simply stopped abandoning itself in order to belong to it. And perhaps that is the quiet truth hidden beneath everything Jung spent his life trying to understand. The final stage was never about ending up alone. It was about reaching the point where, whether surrounded by others or standing in complete solitude, you no longer have to become someone else just to feel at home in your own life. There is one image I want to leave you with. A lighthouse never chases the ships. It never asks them to stay or wonders why some disappear beyond the horizon. It simply stands where it is, keeping its light alive. And because it does, those who are searching eventually know where to find it. Perhaps that is what Jung was trying to describe all along. Not a life without people, not a life without love, but a life that no longer depends on either to know its own worth. Maybe that is why the question was never really, why don't I have friends anymore? That question brought us here, but it was never the deepest one. The deeper question has always been, who am I becoming now that I no longer need to keep wearing the mask? Because in the end, the people who leave are only part of the story. The person who remains after they leave, that is the story Jung spent his life trying to understand. Perhaps the rarest personality was never the one with the fewest friends. Perhaps it is the one that finally becomes itself. If this conversation gave words to something you've been carrying quietly for a long time, consider sharing it with someone who may be walking through the same season of life. Not because this video has every answer, but because sometimes the first step toward understanding is realizing you are not the only one asking these questions. And if exploring Jung's ideas in this way resonates with you, I'd be grateful to have you join me for the next conversation.